My mom is not a very animated person. She's very calm. And I spoke to her in the morning, and I've never heard her sound like that before. The only way I can describe it was like a bomb drop on the place. And at this point, there weren't that many people on the road, residents, and that was concerning. It was like watching fight or flight right in front of your face. I just have to keep reminding myself that we weren't spared, we're just lucky. I am from St. Elizabeth. I spent my early years in Monroe and moved to Middle Quarters, where I've spent most of my time. So when I heard that Hurricane Melissa was heading west, I was very concerned. Seeing the track going right back through Treasure Beach, where barely hit last year and where we actually visited to do follow-ups, was very concerning. And realizing that it would go very close to where I live, where my grandma lives, my family is from, is not just concerning. I don't know how to describe to you. It's not anticipation and worry all bundled up in one. So Melissa came Monday night, started feeling effects Monday night going into Tuesday. Around 2 p.m. Tuesday, I lost all contact with my mom, everybody down there. Prior to that, I was talking to them, getting some very harrowing phone calls. The first phone call I got was from my cousin. She works in the JDF. She's stationed in Kingston. So of course I didn't expect to be hearing from her because we're not getting the worst of it. I'm also in Kingston. She called me and she said, Grandma's roof is gone and they're still in the house. So I said, what do you mean? Let me call down there. That was around 11 o'clock. I'm calling, not getting through to them. So I called my dad, who is in the same community, and I explained to him what's happening. He says, are they still in the house? Because his thinking is he's gonna go get them right now. At that point, it's raining hard. We in Kingston, because I was supposed to be at work at the Observer that day. I didn't come in because my roof in Kingston was also acting crazy. It was lifting. So I was there watching that roof and also trying to organize to get them out of the house with no roof. So he's trying to figure out, we're all trying to figure out, are they still inside? Nobody can get to them, we don't know, and the way to them is blocked, despite the fact that it's not very far from where my dad is. So I called my uncle in Cayman, who was talking to them, and I was like, do you think they're still in the house? He said, more than likely. When I spoke to them last, they told me that the roof was gone and they were in the bathroom. I said, okay, we'll see what we can do. By the time we get that confirmation, that's between 11 to 2 o'clock. At that point, when we've gotten the confirmation that they're still in the house, communication just cuts. I can't hear from my mom, my dad, my grandma, nobody down there. And it's kind of scary because leading up to that point, my mom is not a very animated person. She's very calm. And I spoke to her in the morning and I've never heard her sound like that before, just like at the end of her rope. She was just telling me, well, we have a deck roof, but she's still scooping water. And like just the sound of her voice was frightening because of the way that she sounded. Very scared. And I've never heard my mother sound like that before. So fast forward to trying to get to my grandma. Since I can't get to anybody down there, I call ADPEM and I explain the situation. They take as much information as they can, and they say, we'll send a unit when we can. So I'm like, okay. All right, one situation avoided. Still watching my roof, which is still flapping. And I get another call from my cousin. And this time, she's telling me that her mom, who lives in the same community, middle quarters, her roof is gone. She's outside because there's absolutely nothing left of the roof. And she's slipped and falling. So I'm like, all right. Okay, call by the police. I explain the situation. They say they'll send a unit. She said the only way her mom got to her was by standing outside because her house is on a significantly taller hill than where my grandma lives. So there's some sort of signal there. She could get to her daughter, couldn't get to the police. Get to the police, they say, we'll send a unit. I said, cool. Still watching the roof, still dealing with all of this, and about to start my shift at Observer, which starts at 2. So I am comforted in the fact that the police are going, but still kind of worried because I haven't heard from anyone. I don't know if they've actually made it. And my cousin calls me back again. This time, she's telling me that her church sister has broken her leg and they can't get to the police. So I call back ADPEM, no answer. Call back the police, no answer. This once it's getting dark. So I keep calling the police, I'm calling, and they finally pick up and I explain the situation. There's someone with a broken leg, can you assist? And she's like, I would love to assist, but we can't get to them at this point. There's no way for us to reach them. So call the fire station, they might be able to better assist. I say, okay, cool. Call the fire station, on hold forever. Nobody ever picks up, which I can understand. I call ADPEM, no answer. At this point, it's dark. The wind was starting to pick up in Kingston, so I know it was getting bad down there. And we don't know where my grandma is, if she's made it out of the house. And with her, it's 3 kids, all under 10, and their moms. Don't know if they've made it out of the house to get to somewhere safer. Don't know what's going on with my aunt. My cousin is calling me. She's in tears. And we're just in the dark. So at the same time, I'm watching press briefings, doing my work here in Kingston. And overnight, before we even get to overnight, so I get a call from my editor at Observer. And he said, we're sending some people out to St. Catherine. Do you want to go? So I said, yeah, I want to go. So I grab my water boots, I grab a shirt and a raincoat, and I'm waiting for them to pick me up to go to St. Catherine. And this is still in the middle of Melissa. They call me back and they say, well, transport is limited. We're not going to go to St. Catherine, but we're going to St. Elizabeth first thing tomorrow. Because at this point, based on the press briefings, we understand that the worst of it is between St. Elizabeth and Westmoreland. So I was like, yeah, I want to go. In my head, I'm like, yeah, I want to go. But after hearing all of that, my own roof is going, and not knowing what is going on down there, I just burst out crying with my manager on the phone. And it was just a lot. I had to convince them, took 3 or 4, are you sure? Before they were convinced that I was okay to go. So we get on the road about 7 o'clock from Kingston. And I remember it was so bright and the sun was out, and it was just so weird because at this point, I still don't know where my family is, if they're all good. And everybody's just back to normal, basically. No debris on the road in Kingston that I could see, nothing. And what we saw when we eventually got to New Holland, Middle Quarters, Black River, it was, the only way I can describe it is, first, it took us 2 days to get there. And it was like hollowed out. It was like a bomb drop on the place and just blew everything apart. There was not a single leaf in sight. When we left Kingston, I don't know, do you want me to go through all of the journey? So we left Kingston about 7 o'clock. We picked up our photographer in St. Catherine, picked up another journalist in Mandeville, and so we're on the road. We went on the outskirts of Manchester. We didn't go into the interior because our main goal was to get to Black River. Because at this point, the Prime Minister hadn't gotten there yet, but we knew that's where some of the worst damage was. So we're on our way to Black River. We go through Manchester, some downed trees, some slippage, but not terrible. And we get to Santa Cruz, which is, if you know, the border of St. Elizabeth and Manchester. There's Goshen, Gutters, and you go into Santa Cruz. So we're going to Santa Cruz, and we took the back road on purpose based on videos that we had seen with just waist-high water around there. So we wanted to see what had happened. When we got there, we went into Fern Village Plaza, and people from St. Elizabeth will know that's a fairly new plaza. And you wouldn't be able to tell that this is something that had been built recently because you're stepping into just globs of mud where water boots were going, just sinking. Immediately, I see a Chinese business owner whom I know, and I spoke to him. I was like, what are you doing? They were cleaning up. And I was just shocked. And I spoke to my fellow journalists. I was like, we should do a stand-up here so people can see what's going on. Before we can even start doing the stand-up, I hear a photographer calling me. He said, don't do anything here. You need to see Main Street. So we walk a couple meters into Main Street. And this is where I grew up. This is my town. This is that street. I know it by heart. And I remember there's a particular store that my mom has been shopping at since I was in primary school. It's called Gary's. It's owned by a Chinese Jamaican guy, Gary. And he walked past me, and it was like he was just in a daze. And I said, Gary, and he looked at me and just shook his head and like walked past. Main Street was just a mud hole. People were putting blocks in the road so that they could cross this newly paved street. It was just mud. I remember seeing a woman with her baby just hopping on the blocks, trying to get across the street. When we stepped into it, what is supposed to be, like I said, a newly paved street, I just remember sinking in the mud up to about here, because that's where my water boots were. And it was just shocking, seeing the places that you patronize, where you eat, where you shop, windows broken. I remember there was a shopping cart, a trolley through one of the windows, mothers. And the people were just walking around in like, some of them in a daze. Because at this point, it's about 9 o'clock in the morning, the day after the hurricane. So we're seeing it for the first time, but these people who live here are also seeing it for the first time. And it was just dazed is how I can describe it. Just walking around looking dazed. None of us could believe what we were looking at. And that was just a start. We did the stand-up in Santa Cruz and spoke to a few people. And as we were speaking to people, generally there was dismay and shock and concern, but there was also this kind of, okay, well, you have to take bad things, make joke. You have to take bad things, make joke type of attitude. And we left that attitude in Santa Cruz. Because when we moved out of Santa Cruz, normally it's about a 15-minute drive from Santa Cruz to La Covia, and that is if you're going slow. It took us, just because of the sheer amount of dirt, silt, the road is just split open. And that's why I keep describing it like a bomb drop. Like it's like somebody took their fist and just punched the ground and split it up. Immediately out of Santa Cruz, we meet upon a JDF caravan. About 9 ambulances in the line, lots of other people in the line. And we realize it's not moving. Remember I tell you, this is a 15-minute drive. So after sitting in traffic for about half an hour without moving, we got out of the car and decided to walk up and down and talk to some people. I remember speaking to several people and they're telling me, I haven't heard from my family. I'm going down because I need to know that they're okay. And at the same time, we don't know. I didn't know if my family is okay. So despite the fact that I'm doing my job, I'm also hoping to get there and see. That caravan of JDF soldiers and ambulance drivers, we joined it, and in the line, there was every media house you can imagine. TVJ, Nationwide, CNN, all of these people from overseas. And we were all just like mouths hanging open because of the damage. And at this point, there weren't that many people on the road, residents, and that was concerning. Because normally after a hurricane, residents come out, they walk up and down. We saw basically nobody, which meant they couldn't get to us, which means we probably can't get to them. Those ambulances were in the line to evacuate patients from Black River Hospital. It took us genuinely from about 10:30 to 2 o'clock to chop our way through to La Covia, which is 15 minutes from Santa Cruz. And I remember just the soldiers who weren't necessarily escorting the ambulances, but realized that there was a need. Soldiers, ambulance drivers, volunteers. I remember seeing a guy with one leg just wielding his chainsaw. Those were the people that were out clearing the road. That road is clear because of them, because of those soldiers, because of those ambulance drivers. They cleared it to La Covia, where we met upon 3 concrete light posts in the way. And that's where the caravan stalled for another couple of hours because can't cut them. And they were scared that if they chopped the wires, the tension would bring down others. At that point, we're journalists, we get out of the car, we're talking to people. And there is still this air of, they're jovial. I remember there's this guy in the line in a BMW with a flat tire. He's there with his son, his partner, and a friend. And he spoke to me, he said, I'm from Westmoreland. And I got up on the flat tire because people have called me and told me that my house is flat. So I need to go and see if it's even to just pick up the pieces. And even saying so, you could hear that there's some hope left. And then we got to speaking to the people of La Covia. And they were it was a different vibe. They were that type of joke, just still hopefulness, it was not there. I remember one lady sitting outside her home, her husband was on the roof trying to batten it down so that they would have somewhere to sleep that night. She said to me, at one point I was wondering if there was a hurricane, if there was an earthquake in the hurricane because of how badly her house was shaking. She showed us the cracks it's an old home, but the fact that it was just cracked apart, roof gone. It was just, before we could even move, another man came up and he said, come, I'll show you. And he brought me to his house. Roof is gone. Everything he owns is on the floor. And he said to me, it's not like he didn't want to evacuate. He said when he felt like it was getting too bad, he took up his television and his medication and tried to leave, and he couldn't. And at that point, all that was left for him to do was take up a piece of zinc and back up on the wall, hold the zinc in front of him until the storm passed. I asked him how long he stood there for, and he said like 3 hours behind the zinc. At that point, we have spent the entire day. It's about 5 o'clock and we're still not moving forward. Patients at Black River are waiting to be evacuated and the ambulances are still in line. So our editors made the call and say, come back to Kingston. Of course, it's disappointing because you're leaving all of the other news media in the line. They're preparing to stay overnight. But we decided, it's dark, it's getting dark. We go back to Kingston. We actually stopped in Santa Cruz to just write the stories of the people who had spoken to us and send off those stories and come back into Kingston. We got back into Kingston about 11 o'clock and we were determined to go back the next day. I remember speaking to my editor and he was like, we're gonna send this person and that person. We were like, no, send us back. We want to come back. I want to come back because at this point I still haven't seen my family. It was so distressing to get to Lacovia, which is 15 minutes from middle quarters on a bad day when there's traffic. And there's never traffic in St. Elizabeth. And have to turn back after an entire day, not knowing anything. We turn back and we're determined to come back. So we get back to Kingston 11 o'clock and I remember speaking to my editor. We got up the next morning, 6 o'clock, we're on the road. I remember speaking to my editor and he said, I think you convinced another editor to send you back because I wanted you to take a rest day. And I'm like, well, no rest for the wicked. Get back on the road. And we make it as far. Remember, we stopped in Lacovia. So for those who don't know, you're going into St. Elizabeth, Santa Cruz, Lacovia, Holland Bamboo, which I think a lot of people know, and then you're in New Holland and onto middle quarters, onto Black River. We had made it after a whole day of travel the day before, only to Lacovia. When we get back to Lacovia, this is now Thursday. Thankfully, the road is clear. The concrete posts are out of the way. So we make it 5 minutes down the road and we stop to talk to people because finally we're seeing people on the road. We stopped at a shelter. And I remember there's this old lady. Her name is Mihaela. And she herself, she's elderly. She's in her 80s, she's 82. And she explained to me, I'm here because I have to take care of my sister. Her sister is there, she's 86. And she's explaining how she just had to hold her in her, just wrap her up and hug her up during the hurricane. Because it was that terrifying for her. She spoke to her, she said her sister hasn't really spoken much since then. And as we were there speaking to them, 2 young girls came up and it turned out to be the granddaughters of the ladies. And they were explaining that they live in Slime. And even though the main road is somewhat clear, the branch offs are still stuck. So they're explaining that we have to swim with food for them every day. That's the only way they're going to eat. The house is intact, but the place is flooded to the point where there's nothing else to do but swim, give them the food, swim back. And we haven't even reached Holland Bamboo yet. We get into the bamboo, which is 5 minutes from where we left the caravan yesterday. And people are telling us, it don't make sense. Turn back, you won't be able to get through. So we get out of the van, put on our water boots, and get into the bed of the truck. And we say, well, come hell or high water, we're gonna go. And we went through the bamboo, and everything is still in the way. It's not even single lane traffic, you're just having to pick your way through. At one point, we got out and started to walk. And we saw people coming up because the residents on the other side of the bamboo had started to clear. So we're like, okay, there's hope. So we start walking. We walk and we walk and we walk until who do we meet upon but those ambulance drivers from yesterday, JDF soldiers from yesterday, still chopping their way through the bamboo. So I saw someone and I realized that person looks familiar, still in his dirty clothes, because we're all dirty at this point, trekking through water, mud. And my photographer pointed it out to me. He was like, isn't that the guy from yesterday who got stuck in the mud? And I was like, yes. And he came over to us. He was a surgeon at Mandeville. And I just asked him, where did you sleep last night? He said, we didn't sleep. None of us slept. We didn't take shifts. We just chopped. So he, along with volunteers, those ambulance drivers who are still on their way to pick up patients who are now waiting, it's day 2 rather, after the hurricane. And the JDF soldiers spent the entire night just clearing the way so that every single person who was coming behind them would be able to get to their family. He spoke to us on the condition that we wouldn't video him. He was going to his family in Westmoreland, and he got there eventually. But it was just that kind of tenacity of that group of people. I will never forget it. I will never forget just coming to see them, not rested, not fed, and still pushing their way through. And I just want everybody to know that road that you drive on to go down there, the fact that you were able to get through on day 2 after the hurricane is because of those men. So at that point, we find a bypass. I knew the bypass because that's where I'm from. So there was just a little bit of bamboo left to clear. So we go through the bypass and leave the ambulances in the bamboo. So we kind of got there before them. So when we get through the bypass and get out on the other side, clearing the bamboo, we're now in New Holland. And it meant that we were some of the first people to get there. The very first house we saw was flat. So we stopped and we got out of the van. And coming from Holland Bamboo through the bypass and into New Holland, there was something different about there. The heat just became so oppressive because at that point we had been riding in the bed of the truck, standing outside. And it just became suffocating almost. A guy had given us 2 bottles of water. And we got out of the truck, left the water in the truck, in the van. And I remember the first thing when the people saw us that they asked for was their water. So thankfully I hadn't opened mine yet. I gave away that. My coworker gave away hers. She went to talk to the family, to one of the families. I went to speak to another lady. And the attitude of the people was just like, you know, when them say veterans are shell-shocked, that was the type of just still doing what they could, but still trying to wrap their minds around what happened. When we came around the corner and saw not just the houses, but the hillside, it was stripped bare. It was like looking at toothpicks. There was not a single leaf that you could see. I stopped and I spoke to the lady. Say, good? She said, we're there. What more can we do? She said, she had a concrete part and a decked part on the roof. So of course, Melissa gone with the part of the roofing that wasn't decked. Then a tree fell into the part that was decked. So they were getting wet. And I asked her, where did you go? She said, I'm not gonna work, I'm staying. So in the wet, in the cold. And when we are in the wet and in the cold, people come join us in our wet and cold, because at least we had a roof. At least the concrete was still standing, the walls were still standing. She said the amount of water that came through her house, it was like a river. She couldn't even find some things, plates and so on. Furthermore, there was no food. She said somebody brought her a chicken. She didn't even know what she's gonna do with it because there's no fridge, stove not working because it's soaked, and there's nowhere to put the food. And whatever food she had up to that point is soaking wet, not fit for consumption. And we gave away everything that we brought. We stopped, we had maybe some Gatorade and so on, even stuff that we had already opened. I spoke to somebody, I said, I already started drinking it, you want it? She said, yes, I want it. So I gave it to her. And we moved on, and at one point, I started to search for the houses that still had a roof, rather than search for the houses that had no roof, because there were too many. And I'm like, what is going on? Because this is where I drive to go to school every single day. This is my road where I frequent. I'm passing at this point people that I know, my church brothers and sisters' houses. Everything is outside, roof gone. And there were 5 of us, 3 journalists, a photographer, and the driver, and we split up, went in different directions, and people were they were so anxious to speak. They didn't care that we were just the observer and we didn't necessarily have anything to give them. They just wanted somebody to listen. I remember a lady took me up to the top, up on a hill, and showed me her house. And she was just pointing out the bed in one corner. Other things just strewn everywhere. And she pointed to a concrete and little structure. Just the flat that you would have built up the wooden thing on top of. And she said, that was my kitchen. Gilbert, the kitchen. And she pointed to a bigger concrete structure now, covered in debris. So this is a house. That is a house. And she was pointing out breadfruit and so on. She said, I would eat it, but they're spoiling. All of us got the same story. I came back down the hill with her. Everybody was just hearing, there's nothing to eat. We have coconut, we have breadfruit, we have plantain, but that's about it. Because everything that we had is soaking wet. I remember looking around, and Middle Quarters and New Holland, the Black River runs through that area. Some people call it the Wyeth River. I think Wyeth River is just a tributary of the Black River. So it's a morass type area. And as I'm looking out, it's just water that I can see. Water, and brown trees that a couple of days ago would have been just lush green area. And it was just unbelievable. It's like somebody just fling a grenade and it just blew up everything. I remember an elderly man, he said, come, you want something to drink? You want some? Because at this point, we are giving away everything that we carry, which wasn't much. And he said, come, you're in the sun, do you want a coconut? And I was like, sure, I'll take a coconut. And he cut the coconuts for the team. Because he was like, what else are we gonna do with them? The tree is down. It's actually in his workshop. So he's standing, cutting off the coconuts off the tree that has fallen into his workshop and giving us to drink. And it was just an air of shock just people just shocked. At this point, we're just on the corner of Middle Quarters and New Holland. We kept moving in because the hope was to get to Black River. And I remember turning the corner and seeing a pool, a naturally occurring pool that my brother used to swim in all the time. That gone. It was just, we were driving in a photon, which is, the van is very high and the water was slapping against the door. People that I knew, roofs just gone. We keep going into Middle Quarters now, and we turned the corner and I saw my grandma's house, and there's a coconut tree in the roof of the house. So we stopped, and I went in to talk to my aunt, and a photographer came with me. And the same story that people are telling us, like, you know, we are traumatized, we had to hide in the bathroom, is the same story that I'm hearing from my aunt. My aunt who like packs up her fancy clothes and sends them to me when they can't fit me anymore. She is like now homeless. Like nobody spared. So that's one family member found. And I remember seeing we're going in and still going, and a truck with volunteers in their orange vests passed us, and we're looking at the flooding on this side of the road, and I hear them shouting something, and I wasn't really paying attention because it was so shocking. So we're looking, and I realized that they're shouting, "Joe, Joe, Joe," which is what my father calls me. So the observer truck screeches to a stop, and I jump out, and my father's there. So I run to him, and my uncle was there, my aunt. So at this point, we're confirmed, you know, they're fine. Seeing them was good. I was like, "Where are you guys going?" And they were like, "We don't know. We're just going with volunteers. We're just doing all we can to help." So we didn't stay because, again, we're working. I'm a professional. So we head into Black River. On the way to Black River, Middle Quarters was already bad. That was when, leaving New Holland going into Middle Quarters, was when even the car was just quiet. Even the driver was like, "When this going to come back? When is this place going to come back?" And we're going into Black River. Before we even get into the town proper, on the outskirts of Black River, we start to see like images. And I have to describe them as images because as a journalist, when you're going into, whether it's a disaster area or a murder scene, you catalog things. So you see somebody that's dead and you say, "Okay, well, that's awful, that's bad." And you understand what is happening, make note of it, and then you do your job. And whatever emotion that you have that comes with that realization that, okay, well, someone has died, the emotion has to wait for after, because you can't go on a crime scene, you can't go into a disaster zone and be crying all over the place. So you catalog it, you make note of it, and you leave the rest for later. So we went into Black River, and the scenes, like the images, is like, I'm like, is this really Jamaica though? Because this is the kind of thing that you see on CNN, on AFP, and you empathize, and you realize that it represents something. You realize that it represents devastation, but seeing that in your place I remember just churches with the roof gone and filled with water still. And this is day 2 after the hurricane. People walking, just dragging their feet through the water. And like, it was just seeing devastation in real time is like, I know it alters your brain chemistry. And we had not even yet gotten into the town of Black River. When we get into Black River, first of all, it was filled with people. The road coming up had been quiet in terms of people so far. Black River was filled with people. And the energy was just frantic. The photographer was in the bed of the truck trying to get some photos. I was in the front of the vehicle and my 2 co-workers in the back. Driver was beside me in front. So that's 5 people. And we're looking in 5 different directions. And as soon as people saw the observer on the front of the truck, immediately people walking, people driving past us, they stopped. And it was like when something happens and you finally get the chance to talk about it, and it just comes out of you immediately. As we got into the town, 5 different people talking to us from 5 different directions, and everybody has a different story, and all of them are equally horrifying. Like, I remember this bus driver, and he said, I drive for high school. One of the buses is gone, my house is gone, and I'm sleeping in the bus. And he told that to my coworker, and I just drove off. I remember seeing my high school principal in the crowd, and I called out to her, and she came up. Same story. We didn't have to. Sometimes it's difficult to get people to speak about what has happened to them. And as a journalist, you have to know when to accept a no and not to push, because you don't want to traumatize people further. I don't remember going up to a person who didn't want to speak. We just got out of the truck and lost each other immediately. We went in 5 different directions because there were so many people and they all wanted just to have somebody to listen. And it's like you keep thinking it can't get worse. Stories can't get worse. Some people didn't want to be on camera. And the stories just kept getting worse. I remember a man passed me in a van back, because at this point I'm wearing my Observer shirt and it has pressed on the back. And he passed and he said to me, unprompted, he said, "Beer dead body there, new market." And I'm like, "What did you say?" And he repeated him say, "When I reach up there, beer dead body." And just walked off, just left. And I took 2 things, I think, from being in Black River that day. First of all, it was just like, I don't know, those time lapses where you see somebody, they put somebody in like New York City in Times Square and that person stays still and everybody else is going around them. That was what it felt like. Because the first thing that I realized is that pride is a luxury. Pride is something to be saved for when you're not starving and for when everything around you is flat. And I'm not saying, like, there was no pride in Black River that day. And I'm not like saying it to judge the people who are there in the slightest. I'm saying it because as Jamaicans, we like to say we're proudful people. We have pride. And these same people, friends, neighbors, I remember pastor, were just pulling if they weren't walking around dazed and just looking at what was going on, they were doing their best, just walking past with cases of food, cases of water, Malta, whatever they could carry. And I know it's not because these people are robbers and thieves. It's because they were desperate. So that was like the first realization. First of all, when they're in a white shirt, and when people start like hugging you and touching you, and you're walking past all of this debris, like that was brown by the end of the day. And aside from the fact that everybody was so desperate, I remember speaking to about 5 adult men, a business owner, a guy, a volunteer for ODPEM, 2 soldiers, and a fireman. And these are, well, aside from the business owner, men who are trained to handle high stress situations. And all of them were telling me the same thing. I don't want to do an interview with you right now, but I can tell you what happened. I can tell you that I'm traumatized. I remember the ODPEM volunteer in particular, because he was so tall and he had blue eyes, so they were very striking. And he said to me, "Miss, I'm traumatized. I am traumatized." And at one point, like, he had to turn away his face because he was about to cry. Like, he was like, you know what people will go out in the water and to save, and they're scared, and I'm scared, and they're fighting me. I'm traumatized. I went up to a business owner who opened this business for people to come and take what they needed. And he said to me, "Give me a number, maybe one day I'll call you and talk about it, but right now, I can't." And this big man, he put his head in his hands and he was like, can't talk about it. And it was the same. I went to 2 soldiers, and if there's anybody that is trained to handle high stress situations, it's gonna be a soldier. And the young man said to me, "It's JDF policy that we don't speak, we don't give statements, but I can tell you, I'm traumatized. I am traumatized." And there was, I don't know how many people have seen those massive JDF tanks. Tank is probably not the right word, vehicles, but they're quite large, much taller than a man, high up on the road. And he pointed to, at that point it was open. So the bonnet, if that's what you call it, on that vehicle opened, and they were trying to fix it. And he pointed to it and he said, "This came out yesterday with water, to the point that it's not working today. We're trying to get it started." That's how high the water was. I spoke to a fireman. He was pushing out mud out of the fire station. And he said to me, "My worry was that the fire station was going to sink because we live in a swampy area." Same thing. Him say, "Miss," and this is a fireman, "Miss, I'm traumatized. I'm traumatized." And they're describing wind and rain that we as Jamaicans who were not in Cornwall have never experienced. If you were not in Cornwall or on the outskirts of Cornwall, you don't know what Hurricane Melissa was like. I don't know what Hurricane Melissa was like, because the hurricane that they are describing is not what I went through. It's not what we went through in Kingston. And we will never be able to understand fully what they went through. There is a line of demarcation between people who had to experience that, and the people who didn't. And it was just so obvious when we were there. People were just, the energy was just frantic. They were trying to get what they could. And at the same time, as soon as you spoke to them, stories just pour out. It was like watching fight or flight right in front of your face. Because as somebody is pulling a case of Malta, you ask them something simple as, are you okay? And then put it down and start to describe things to you that are just unimaginable. Some of them start crying. It was tough. And I remember we lost each other because there was no signal. Went our separate ways. And we were supposed to turn back and go to Kingston. Couldn't find each other. It took us about 2 hours to find each other. And we were just working, trying to get the stories told, trying to make sure that everything that we saw, everything that we heard would make it to Kingston so that the people who can't possibly understand would be able to see it and understand. And I remember coming up in the vehicle and my coworker was just like, so when am I gonna sleep? And I'm like, for real, when am I gonna sleep? Because house is flat, roof's gone, shelters were full. And all of that, throughout all of that, we're just doing our jobs in the most effective way we know how, which means talking to people, allowing them to express their emotions and not clouding it with your emotions, no matter how you want to react, no matter what you feel about it. And I came up and I couldn't sleep because I'm just thinking about like, oh, Black River is gone. Black River is gone. The same Black River that I go to all the time no longer exists. And my friends, my neighbors, houses, looking at a house that you know somebody has spent their life building and it's flat is, I can't imagine how that person feels. And before we left, I got to see my house and I couldn't even stay there long because, well, we had a grove of coconut trees. It was flat, the fence flat, yes. An East Indian mango tree, flat. And all I could think was that, you're such a horrible person. Because I was just so glad that my house wasn't flat. And I couldn't even stay with my mother for 5 minutes because I felt so guilty. So she made food for us and we took it and went. And it was like, back to work. So we sent off the stories. And I remember coming back into Kingston and at this point, we're all still professional. Coming to Kingston, drop off everybody. And I was scrolling through Twitter because at that point people were using it to shout out where their families were and where eyes needed to be. So we were paying attention to make sure that if something happened, if somewhere wasn't getting attention, we could step in and do what we could to give some attention. And I remember seeing the video from El Salvador, I think it was, with the volunteers and the aid coming in. And that's when it all like became too much, because I'm like, we really need it. For the first time in my life, we need aid. Like, there's no place for pride or anything. We need it. Like, and every blanket, every cup soup is going to people that I know. And it was just a lot. It was, and I'm saying it's a lot. I came back to a house. I came back to a job. I came back and JUTCs were still running, people going to work. And at the same time, people are in St. Elizabeth in Westmoreland just walking around in the ruins of their homes. So that's a lot to swallow. But I just have to keep reminding myself that we weren't spared. We're just lucky. And it's up to those of us who are lucky to do the work, to keep going back, to make sure that people don't forget, to give these people the opportunity to tell their own story and hopefully broadcast it in a way where they get assistance. And I can see where that's been happening. It's one thing that I'm proud of, in terms of the O team. Really went hard in terms of doing our best to bring people's stories to the forefront. And I see where I see it in the email every day, people reaching out, how do I get in contact with this person? How do I get in contact with that person? Please, I want to help them have something. But the experience of being in a disaster zone isn't something that I would recommend for anyone at all. Maybe I shouldn't have gone to the place where I'm from, but I'm glad I did. Would I do it again? I don't know. I don't know. I've talked out all the time, I think.